Anybody who's thinking about the state of the Christian church in our time would surely be concerned with the fact that Paul wanted all Christians to say the same thing, to be perfectly united in one judgment. You'll find that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. I wish above all things, Paul said there, my brothers and sisters, that you all say the same thing, that you be perfectly united in one mind and one spirit. Surely looking around at the thousands of different denominations who meet separately, because it would be embarrassing all of them to meet together, the splits and factions would be quite extraordinarily obvious. So what has happened must surely be the intelligent question that each of us would want to ask. What has happened to the faith that we are here 2,000 years later than Jesus with such a mass of differing opinions about every imaginable theological topic? Something has gone wrong. Well, that something that went wrong happened very early, from the 2nd century. The influence of Greek philosophy on the faith was devastatingly bad. The leaders of the church in New Testament times, in fact the whole Bible is written by Jews, Jewish people, what we loosely call Jews today. The New Testament writers, 9 of them perhaps, are Jewish with the probable exception of Luke. That's fascinating. From the 2nd century onwards, however, leadership in the church has moved from Jews to Gentiles. And Justin Martyr, one of the leading spokesmen for the faith in the 2nd century, 150 AD or so, was a Greek philosophically trained teacher. Is it almost without question a fact that he would bring in his philosophy to the church and change the name of the game? Adolf Harnack, the great church historian, knew that to be true. Loofs and others understood the historical fact that the nature of the church changed in the 2nd century. So, if we're to get back to the basics, we have to say, who is God? We start with that. Well, God is defined by the creed of Israel and the creed of Jesus. That's quite clear. So over in Mark 12:29, Jesus is discussing the issue of who God is with a friendly Jew. And that Jew is checking Jesus out to see if he's sound. And that Jew finds Jesus to be entirely sound on the most fundamental of all issues, that's to say, who God is. And guess what? God is not a triune God there. It is historically an enormous anachronism to pretend that the Trinity is known within the pages of the New Testament. This is admitted and confessed by so many people who themselves are Trinitarians these days. It's just a fact historically. Jesus was a Jew, a unitary monotheistic Jew, who agreed with the unitary strict monotheism of that Jew who questioned him in Mark 12:29. Now note carefully what Jesus did immediately after agreeing on the unitary monotheistic strict monotheism of Israel, that God is a single person. Note carefully what Jesus, foreseeing problems no doubt, what he immediately followed that discussion of the Shema with. He asked them a question. He turned the tables on them. Instead of them asking questions, he asked them, let me ask you this question. And being the brilliant rabbi that Jesus was, the teacher of the Christian faith, the founder, the forerunner, and the pioneer, if you like, the pioneer, I should say, not forerunner, because he himself founded the Christian church and the Christian teaching. Jesus did. He's the pioneer of the Christian faith. So he asks them a question. What do you think about Psalm 110 and verse 1, where David there speaks of the Messiah as my Lord? Refers to the Messiah as my Lord. There's an oracle in that psalm. Now that Psalm 110 verse 1 is quoted and recited more often than any other verse by far in the New Testament. Why then don't sermons begin with those verses? If you want to follow the mind of the apostles, you follow the method by which they get to the truths that they expound. Well, Psalm 110:1 is it. Yahweh there, if you're using the Hebrew name, you don't need to. In fact, the practice of the New Testament is not to use the Hebrew name, but the Lord God, Adonai, they would have said, the Lord Adonai, gives an oracle to my Lord. Now that second Lord is not Adonai, absolutely not. That would be God speaking to God, and the universe would be shattered. It is Adonai, the Lord God, addressing an oracle to Adoni, which should not have a capital letter on it. So strike that capital letter out of your translation, if you happen to have one of this wrong. Lower the L to a lowercase l, and you've got my Lord there, the Lord Messiah. Now that word Adoni is massively frequent in the Old Testament, 195 times. It never means God. So God cannot be speaking to God. That's just wrong. Yahweh, or the Lord God, we should say Adonai, is addressing in an oracle then my Lord the Messiah. That's the royal messianic title. That's who Jesus is. There's one God the Father and one Messiah, Jesus. 1 Timothy 2:5 should put an end to all discussion and argumentation. That's not difficult at all. He speaks to Messiah, Lord, and he says, sit at my right hand until in the future I make your enemies your footstool. There's the whole plan laid out plainly and simple. The actors in the drama are the one God of Israel, the God of David, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the God of Jesus, the one God, Adonai. They would have read it as Adonai, the Lord. And Jesus is not a second God. That's impossible, quite unnecessary. He's the supremely exalted human being, the Lord Messiah at the right hand of Father. And finish with this thought in Luke 2:11, our brilliant brother Luke, who so beautifully describes the faith in 2 volumes, there at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, he introduces with a plain and straightforward birth certificate for who Jesus is. The angels are shouting with joy, and they're declaring the fact that Jesus is the Messiah Lord. The Messiah Lord. Note the Greek carefully there. Christos Kyrios. The Messiah Lord, not the Lord God. Nobody thought the Lord God was being born. That's just frankly silly. No, the Messiah Lord was born. And then in verse 2, chapter 2:26, a few verses later, this same Lord Messiah is also, of course, the Lord God's Messiah, Adonai's Messiah. Yes, he's the Messiah belonging to the one God, but he himself, Jesus, is the man, the Messiah Lord. Indeed, those blind men sitting on the edge of the street begging Jesus to heal them were smarter than a lot of us today when they recognized Jesus as Lord, Son of David. That's not Lord God. Lord, Son of David. How beautifully easy that is. Now these are huge issues because there are a billion Muslims for whom the identity of God is a critical issue, and there are millions of Jews for whom the identity of God is the critical issue. All of us divided, fragmented into huge blocks of differing opinions over the issue of who God is. Why can't we settle on the Shema? And then John 17:3, you Father, Jesus said in an impassioned prayer shortly before he died, you are o monos alithnos theos. You are the only one who is true God. Now that's an exclusive phrase. Monos means alone, monos means by yourself. It means only one, not more than one. If you are the only one and there's no other beside you, you are singular and unique in your class. And the Father enjoys that supreme position as being the only one who is the true God.